Chosen one, your existence is their biggest problem. They are trying to solve you, but no matter how hard they try, they cannot succeed. Because you were not created according to the rules of this world. Those who do not understand you will try to stop you. But remember, you should write 77 in the comments because you cannot be calculated, you cannot be controlled, you cannot be stopped. You are here, and that is enough. The room was thick with the unspoken tension of those who could not decipher the presence before them. Their rehearsed routines, their calculated maneuvers, none of it held power here. They leaned in, searching for a foothold in a landscape that refused to be mapped. One moment, warmth radiated, an effortless charm, drawing them in. The next, a cold, unwavering force unsettled their assumptions. Their carefully crafted perceptions fractured under the weight of unpredictability, leaving them grasping for explanations that did not exist. What unsettled them was not action, but existence itself. There was no strategy behind this fluidity, no grand scheme orchestrated in secret, and yet they found themselves disoriented, powerless in the face of something they could not confine to their limited understanding. The contrast was too stark, too seamless, a force neither seeking to dominate nor submit, only existing in its undeniable truth. Their attempts to define it only pushed them further from comprehension. Their unease deepened as realization dawned. The authority here did not come from words, nor from displays of force. It was woven into the silence, in the effortless shifts between presence and distance. They strained to predict, to contain, to categorize, but the foundation of their control crumbled beneath them. There was no pattern to break, no weakness to exploit. This was not defiance. It was simply a reality that would not yield to their will. They felt it before they understood it, the weight of something immovable, the quiet certainty that would not falter in the face of scrutiny. What disturbed them was not resistance, but the absence of need for resistance. They were looking for an opponent, but none stood before them. They were preparing for a battle, but none had been declared. They were waiting for something to break, yet nothing wavered. The tension belonged to them alone. Their calculations became irrelevant. The strategies they trusted, the assumptions they built upon, all of it shattered in the presence of something they could not quantify. Their need to categorize, to define, to control. It only highlighted their own limitations. The more they searched for a fixed point, the more they realized it did not exist. They were lost, not because of deception, but because the very framework of their understanding had been rendered useless. They stumbled, they recalculated, they tried to reclaim their footing, but it was never taken from them. They were fighting shadows, seeking to tame what had never sought their permission to exist. The frustration in their eyes was not that they were losing control, it was that control had never been theirs to begin with. There is a weight in their stares, a silent battle waged in the space between questions they will never dare to ask. They reach, they probe, they attempt to box in something that refuses to be captured. The measurements they rely on, the logic they trust, the certainty they cling to, it all falters in the face of what they cannot define. What moves before them is neither confined nor constrained, an existence untethered to the constructs they hold dear. They convince themselves that if they watch closely enough, they might unravel the mystery, but mysteries do not exist to be solved. They exist to remind the world of its limits. They speak in absolutes, desperate to force a shape onto something that shifts beyond their comprehension. They whisper among themselves, their confusion twisting into frustration, yet none of it alters the course before them. The weight of their assumptions is theirs to carry, for it does not belong to the one who has no need for validation. Definition is a burden for those who lack understanding. A force that answers only to itself does not concern itself with the expectations of those who were never meant to understand it. To them, the absence of explanation is resistance, a refusal to yield. But there is no resistance, only presence. It does not retreat nor advance, does not explain nor justify. It simply is, unmoved by the noise of those who seek to grasp what will never be theirs to hold. They search for a pattern, but patterns exist for things meant to be repeated. There is no repetition here, no cycle they can predict, only an unfolding beyond their reach. If you feel the abundance of divine love in your heart, now is the time to share it. You can help spread God's blessings by clicking the super thank you button on YouTube and contributing $20 or more. This divine gift will touch not only your life, but the souls of many through this platform. Each of you has a sacred place in God's grand design, and your generosity will be the fruit of our prayers. Act now. Share your blessings to glorify His kingdom, for you were created to do even greater things in God's loving hands. May God bless you. They believe that to name something is to control it, that to decipher a force is to weaken it. But what stands before them is neither a riddle nor a problem to be solved. It does not require their comprehension to exist. They call it erratic because they cannot follow its rhythm. Call it distant because they cannot reach it. Call it strange because it does not bend to their logic. But none of these labels alter the truth. It has no need to be understood, no obligation to conform, no reason to explain. It exists as it always has, outside the reach of those who fear what they cannot define. Some will understand, most will not. Those who recognize the resonance will feel the pull, a quiet knowing that requires no words, no permission. There are those who wander, and then there are those who move with purpose, untamed by the limits placed upon them by the world. They do not search for belonging in places not meant for them. They do not seek approval from those who were never meant to see them clearly. They move, not for recognition, but because it is the only path they have ever known. Not all will understand, and that is precisely the point. They attempt to mold an explanation around what they cannot grasp, seeking to tether the untamed, to hold in place what refuses to be static. Their discussions carry an edge of desperation, their carefully structured thoughts unraveling in the face of something that does not conform. They calculate, theorize, and dissect, yet every answer they find only brings them closer to admitting they do not understand. The very senses they rely upon betray them. Sight distorts, reason falters, expectation dissolves. They call it an anomaly, but the truth is far simpler. What stands before them was never meant to be contained within their narrow view of reality. There are rules they have built their world upon, guidelines that shape their understanding. Yet those rules do not extend here. What they have clung to so tightly, the logic they believe to be unshakable, is nothing more than a fragile illusion that crumbles upon impact. They resist, not because they are strong, but because they are afraid, and fear will never be enough to hold back what is inevitable. There is no battle, no confrontation, only the quiet, undeniable truth that the systems they trust do not apply here. The world does not bend to them. It never did. They come armed with certainty, believing they can probe deep enough to expose a vulnerability to make sense of what confounds them. But they do not see their own reflection in their inquiries, do not recognize that what troubles them most is not the unknown, but their inability to define it. They are unprepared for what does not respond as they expect. The game they are trying to play is already lost, not because they were defeated, but because they never had control in the first place. Again and again, the same scene unfolds. They wait for the inevitable falter, for the signs of struggle, for the cracks in the surface that would prove their assumptions right. And yet, they witness something else entirely: stability where there should be collapse, composure where there should be disorder. It is not resistance that unsettles them, it is the lack of it. The realization dawns too late. The chaos existed only in their minds, never in the presence before them. They are not searching for what is there. They are searching for something that fits within their understanding, for something that bends to their expectations. But the more they seek, the further they drift from truth. They call it misalignment, an error in calculation, an oversight in their model. But in the end, they will have to accept what has been clear from the beginning. They are not watching something lost. They are the ones who cannot find their way. There is no need to explain, no need to translate into a language that was never meant to hold such meaning. What moves through this space does not concern itself with comprehension, does not shrink to fit within the limitations of those who cannot keep up. The force is not erratic, not chaotic. It is precise, intentional, unwavering. The misunderstanding belongs to those who attempt to impose structure where there was never meant to be any. They will try to define it, to categorize it, to write it into a narrative that makes sense to them, and they will fail. Nothing bends, nothing alters to suit their expectations. It moves as it always has, neither asking for permission nor seeking recognition. They watch, bewildered, trying to shape an explanation around something that refuses to be named. They want to break it down into pieces they can hold, but no matter how they try, it remains whole, untouchable, unshaken. Long after they abandon their search, long after their voices fade into irrelevance, the presence they could never define will remain, exactly as it always was. They try to break it down, to deconstruct the presence before them into fragments they can measure, believing that if they analyze it long enough, they will find a way to define it. But their calculations fail. Their measurements contradict themselves, and their assumptions dissolve in the face of something that does not conform. Their minds are wired to search for patterns, for familiar frameworks, for explanations that fit within the borders of their understanding. But this was never meant to fit. It was never crafted from their principles, never bound by the constraints they impose on the world. It exists beyond what they have access to, and that realization unsettles them more than anything else. Absence is never just a void, it is an unveiling. It is in the moments when they think nothing is happening that the cracks begin to show. They do not notice the foundation shifting beneath them until they are stumbling. They do not recognize the balance that held their world together until the equilibrium is gone. They scramble to replace what they took for granted, to reconstruct what they thought was interchangeable. But imitation cannot replicate the original. What was present was never a simple element. It was the structure itself, and now they are left to understand the weight of what they never truly saw. Dear brothers and sisters, may God's peace be upon you today. I am here to remind you of a profound truth. Our existence is grounded in God's divine plan, unshaken by the temporal concerns of the world. As the Bible says, whatever is done in faith will return to God in abundant blessing. Luke 6:38. Like that great oak tree, our roots are deeply rooted in God's universal truth. Every step we take, every stand we take, is secured by His strength. And now, you are being offered the opportunity to be part of that blessing. When you use the super thank you button and donate $100, this movement will return to you 100-fold in abundance. The system they believed to be complete is now missing something fundamental, and for the first time, they are forced to acknowledge it. It was never an option, never an extra piece. It was the core, the silent force that gave meaning to the structure. They assumed they could extract it, examine it, and still move forward as if nothing had changed. But now, the absence is too glaring to ignore. They mistook function for essence, thought they could separate the two, and now they watch as everything that once made sense begins to unravel. It's like trying to catch the wind in your hands, like standing by the ocean and demanding the tide obey your voice. They come believing they can chart the divine, that they can fit the vastness of what they do not understand into a vessel of their own making. But you cannot pour eternity into a cup. You cannot force the river to flow in reverse. And yet they arrive, certain they know the way. Like a traveler stepping onto sacred ground with a broken compass, they come believing they know the path. They clutch their maps, filled with lines and symbols drawn by men who never set foot beyond the edges of their own knowledge. They believe that if they trace enough paths, if they measure enough distances, they will find the center of something that was never built to be mapped. But their maps are useless here. Their compasses spin without direction, and the more they seek to impose their own understanding, the more lost they become. They thought they could carve a road where none was meant to exist. They assumed that because they had walked before, because they had studied the steps of others, they could claim the journey as their own. But this is not a road for those who demand to walk it. It is not a door that opens at the force of will. The ones who try to force their way through will find only exhaustion. They will wander in circles, chasing their own shadows, never realizing that the key was never effort, it was surrender. They measure, they calculate, they construct theories and stack assumptions like stones on unstable ground. But no matter how high they build, it all falls apart beneath them, because what they seek is not something they can build for themselves. It is not something they can force into existence. It is something they must align with. And until they understand that, they will always find themselves staring at the threshold but never stepping inside. They come armed with knowledge, with logic, with plans that they believe will unlock the unseen. But none of it holds weight here. The rules they trust do not apply. The expectations they cling to do not hold. They believe that if they can just ask the right questions, they will receive the answers they seek. But this is not a matter of intellect. It is a matter of spirit. They believe the road is hidden, that the mystery is kept from them. But the road is not hidden. It is simply not built for those who seek to control it. It is not a question of knowledge. It is a question of readiness. And readiness is not something that can be calculated. It is something that is felt, something that is known in the marrow of the soul. It's like standing at the edge of a river, demanding the water part before stepping in. They want guarantees before they move, a contract with the divine, a promise that everything will make sense before they take a single step. But that's not how this works. The river doesn't part for those who stand still. It moves for those who trust the current and step forward anyway. They call it unfair. They say it should be clearer. They insist that if something is real, it should be provable, quantifiable, measurable. But faith was never about proof. It was never about certainty. Faith is walking without needing to see. It is moving without demanding an explanation. And until they understand that, they will always be on the outside looking in. They clutch their need for control like a lifeline, convinced that if they just push hard enough, they'll force the universe to reveal its secrets. They think faith is something to be earned, something to be wrestled into submission. But faith isn't a prize for those who ask the most questions. It's a path that only opens to those willing to walk without knowing where it leads. They think if they analyze enough, break it down into pieces, they'll finally hold it in their hands. But faith is not a puzzle to be solved. It is a doorway that only opens from the inside. And as long as they stand outside demanding proof, they will remain right where they are. Some will grow frustrated and walk away, deciding that if they cannot force an answer, then there must not be one. Others will keep striving, turning over every stone, convinced that if they dig deep enough, they will find the key. But the ones who truly understand, they don't stand at the edge waiting for certainty. They don't demand the river to move before they step in. They simply walk forward, and the path appears beneath their feet. Some will give up, convinced that if they cannot understand it, it must not exist. Others will double down, trying harder, demanding answers, forcing themselves into exhaustion. But the wise, the ones who are truly ready, will do something different. They will set down their tools, their maps, their compasses. They will stop trying to fit the infinite into something finite. They will stop asking and start listening. Because this is not a road that is found. It is a road that reveals itself when the heart is ready to walk it. They have always believed they could build their own way in, that they could force the door open with effort, with knowledge, with certainty. But now they stand before something that does not answer to them, something that does not yield to their control. And for the first time, they feel it, the weight of what they do not know, the presence of something greater than themselves. Some will turn away, unwilling to release their grip on the idea that they must always be in control. Others will try again, refusing to accept that there are things beyond their reach. But those who are ready will step forward, not with force, not with demand, but with openness. Because this is not a door that can be broken down. It is a door that opens from within. And those who were always meant to walk through it will know, not because they forced their way in, but because they were ready to receive what was waiting for them all along. They arrive with certainty, armed with logic, convinced they have the tools to understand, to classify, to predict. But nothing unfolds as they expected. Their questions turn in on themselves, their reasoning loops into paradoxes, their theories fall apart before they can be tested. Every attempt to categorize results in contradictions. Every effort to define only proves their own limitations. And as they struggle, as they grasp at conclusions that do not hold, the truth settles in. They were never close to understanding. They thought they could measure the unseen, as if divinity could be put into numbers, as if the movement of the eternal could be contained in equations. They stand at the edge of something vast and unknowable, trying to carve it into pieces, small enough to fit into their hands. But what they hold crumbles like dust, slipping between their fingers before they can name it. They search for boundaries, but here there are none. They seek an endpoint, but this path was never meant to be walked in straight lines. They speak in the language of control, of certainty, of rigid truths that cannot bend. But the presence before them does not bow to their logic. It does not ask for recognition. It does not wait to be understood. It simply is, and that more than anything terrifies them, because they have built their lives on the idea that everything must have a reason, that everything must make sense. But here, in the presence of something beyond their reach, their definitions crumble, their confidence fractures, and for the first time, they are forced to face the reality that there are forces in this world that do not answer to them. They have always believed that if they ask the right questions, they will get the right answers, that if they dig deep enough, they will find the source. But this is not something they can dig up, not something they can uncover with effort alone. It is not buried, it is not hidden, it is simply beyond them. And so they stand there, with their broken tools and their useless calculations, staring into the unknown. Some will turn away, unwilling to admit that they do not have control. Others will keep searching, convinced that if they try hard enough, they will find a way to bend this force to their will. But the wise, the ones who are truly ready, will let go. They will drop their tools, abandon their measurements, and step forward in faith. Because this is not something to be grasped, it is something to be received. The world is filled with those who think they can chart their own way to power, to understanding, to wisdom. They believe they can take shortcuts, that they can force their way in. But what they do not understand is that some doors only open from the inside, and those who were never meant to enter will find that no matter how hard they knock, the door remains closed. They thought they could build a bridge to the eternal using bricks made from their own logic, their own knowledge, their own intellect. But the moment they try to step across, the bridge crumbles beneath their feet. Because this is not a path that can be walked with intellect alone. It is a journey of alignment, of surrender, of stepping into something greater than themselves. Now is the time to share God's blessings by clicking the super thank you button on YouTube. You can contribute to His plan and be a part of this divine mission with a donation of $100 or more. Every gift reflects God's generosity, and I believe it will return to you exponentially, far beyond your expectations. Remember, His protection and blessing is on your every step and every donation. You become part of His divine plan. You are a strong, radiant being, unshakable as His mighty rock. Witness God's miracles, feel the fruits of your generosity in your soul, and illuminate the world with confidence and courage. Be blessed, and let the light of the Lord guide your path. They believed they could own what was never meant to be owned. They thought they could possess what was always meant to flow freely. But now, they stand, empty-handed, looking at something they cannot hold, cannot contain, cannot name. And in that moment, they have a choice. They can keep trying to define it, to break it down into something small enough for their minds to grasp. Or they can admit that some things were never meant to be grasped at all. The ones who will understand are not the ones who question the most, nor the ones who analyze the deepest. The ones who will understand are the ones who stop demanding answers and start listening. The ones who let go of the need to control and step forward in faith. Because this was never about knowledge, this was about alignment. And those who are meant to walk this path will walk it, not because they force their way in, but because they were always meant to. They do not lack intelligence, they lack range. Their world is built on rules and structures that cannot accommodate something beyond them. Their systems rely on predictability, on sequences, on things they can measure and control. But what stands before them is untethered, unrestricted, immune to their attempts at containment. They are not shut out. They are simply unable to perceive. And rather than admit their own limitations, they declare it incomprehensible. But it is not the mystery that is at fault. It is their inability to see what has always been in front of them. They will chase, they will theorize, they will strain to connect the pieces into something they can grasp. But nothing is hidden. Nothing is being withheld. It is all there, fully present, fully realized. They are the ones who remain blind. Their confusion is not a reflection of complexity, but of their own unreadiness. They do not stand before an enigma. They stand before the undeniable, and they are simply not prepared to face it.